Hi everyone, welcome to week 9 live stream. Today we'll be looking at ecosystem ecology. So if you have the worksheet, please go ahead and pull it out. All right, so first we're going to draw a simple diagram of pyramid of productivity of a grassland community. So for this, you guys should refer to figure 53.4 and 53.5 in your Biologicals of Science textbook, but I'll draw a very common trophic level in food chain. So usually we're going to have the producers at the bottom, and it's important to note that they're the biggest group in this because they are occupying, like in the triangle, you'll see that they're occupying most of the space, and then we have our primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. Sorry, my pencil is being really weird today. Sorry, this is, I don't know what's happening, but I'll just talk instead of trying to write it because my iPad won't let me. So at the top right here, you have your tertiary consumers, and here will be your secondary, and here will be your primary. And so the next question is asking us to look at where would human beings belong in the diagram. So do you guys have any guesses on where you think human beings will be in this diagram? I'm hearing tertiary and at the top. Yeah, so humans can belong in the tertiary ones where they're consuming secondary consumers. But however, if humans are like strictly vegetarians and only eat plants, that would actually make them primary consumers instead of tertiary. So it just kind of depends, and it shows how um, one like an animal as complex as human beings can sometimes be grouped into two different things. Let me see if my writing works now. Okay, looks like it's not giving any problems. All right, another thing to know is that every step, like you go above the pyramid, you lose energy. So energy is transferred, for example, from primary consumer to secondary consumer, and it's estimated that only 1% of solar energy strikes the plant for it to be converted into chemical energy. And then of that energy, only 50 to 90 becomes the net primary production. So essentially what you like the important thing to get from here is that only less than 10% of the energy available transfers to the next level. So it would be important to remember that if you have a lot of energy at the bottom, not all of it goes to the top. It only 10% of that goes, and then 10% of that 10% goes to the next level. So now we're going to restate the preceding information in our own words and try to explain gross primary productivity and net primary productivity. So first I will write the definitions here. Sorry, it's not total number, total amount of light. And then know that some of the units can be kcal, meter square over a year. That's one of the common units for that. And then now NPP, that is going to, NPP is going to equal to GPP minus the energy the photosynthetic organisms use for cellular respiration. And this can also be expressed in the same unit as above, or it can be expressed in joules per meter square over year. All right, any questions on that so far? All right, so yeah, the information we were given before states that sunlight reaches plants and only 1% of it's converted to chemical energy. So that part is a measure of GPP because it's talking about how much light energy is used per unit of time. And then, so 50 to 90% of that would be that 1%. And then we can calculate the NPP by subtracting that from the energy that was actually used for cellular respiration. All right, so the next question is asking us, where does the lost energy actually go? And it says it is correct to say that energy is lost in these transfers. If not, what would be a better way of expressing it? So energy that is lost in these transfer is usually used by the organism in their own metabolism, like for them to go through cellular respiration, or sometimes they excrete it, or it's for digestion, or not being able to digest things. So, for example, primary consumers need to eat a lot of plant, like 10 grams of plant, just to gain 1 gram of biomass. That's because the other 9 grams are either being oxidized or they have to build more biomass or maintain life function. And another option is that they're just not digestible. So that shows why a lot of the primary consumers need to eat a lot of plants just to get 1 gram of biomass. So I'm going to write that here. All right, now we're going to do some calculation, and I'll read this part out here aloud. In the Hubbard-Brook ecosystem, scientists estimate that solar radiation input to the forest is 1254000 kilocal per square meter. And then other scientists have estimated that the Earth as a whole receives about 10 to the 22 joules of solar radiation, and they're giving us a conversion factor here about how to go from joules to calories. It is also estimated that primary producers collectively create 170 billion tons of organic matter per year. So now we're going to do some calculations to determine how these latter two values compare. So the first part is to convert the 10 to the 22 joules per day into kilocalorie per day. So remember that they gave us the conversion factor right here. 1 joule is equal to 0.239 cal. So we're going to use that to make the conversion here. Oh, my pencil is not working again. Okay. All right, I'm gonna just try my best over here. Let's see if the pencil. All right, so I'm just gonna write the answer here and put my work on my computer in the chat for you guys to see since my screen is not working. All right, so for the first question, let me just send the work through the chat. Looks like the picture's not going through the chat either. Does anyone know how to send pictures on the chat? All right, I'm gonna try this one more time. Okay, I'm just gonna verbally do this. So first what we would do is we would multiply the 10 to, oh, no worries about it. I don't know how to use it either. Sorry for the tech difficulties today. So for converting 10 to the 22 joules per day into kilocalories per year, what I would first do is take 10 to the 22 and multiply it 0.239 calories per joule, which is what they gave us, the conversion factor. And that gives us 0.239 times 10 to the 22 calories per day. And if we take that, we just have to multiply that by 365 to go from day to year. So the final answer would be 8.7 times 10 to the 23rd cals per year. Okay, so for the next part, it's asking us to convert 170 billion tons of organic matter into kilocalories. To do that, we're going to assume all of the 170 billion ton is glucose. And we're also assuming that tons are metric tons. And it's giving us another conversion, which is 180 grams of glucose is burned with 686 kilocalories of energy. So first what we would do is we would take the 170 billion ton, since it's metric ton, it would be 170 times 10 to the 9, and we would multiply that by 1,000 grams per kilograms. and again by 1,000 kg. We're basically just trying to get it into grams per year of biomass. And once we do that, at the end, we have to multiply it by 686 because that's how many kcals are there per gram of, or 180 grams of glucose. And the answer comes out to be 6.5 times 10 to the 17 kcal per year. Okay, looks like I can write on this part, so I'm just gonna put my work there. Oh, I guess not, but here's the answer. The 6.5 times 10 to the 7 is the answer for part B. And then for part C, what we're going to do is we're going to take the number we got for part B and divide it by the answer we got for part A. So 6.5 times 10 to the 7 divided by 8.7 times 10 to the 23. And we can do this because both of their units are kilocal per year. So we get 7 times 10 to the negative 5, which equals 0.007%. So that's basically saying that 0.007% of the total incoming solar energy is actually used by plants and is captured as glucose, or is able to be used to be converted into glucose. All right, so the next question says measurements of photosynthetic conversions of energy in sunlight to biomass indicates that at best, plants can convert about 75% of energy observed as sunlight into biomass. The other 25% is used to support metabolism. What could account for the apparently low efficiency of photosynthesis relative to the total incoming of solar energy that is captured in part B? So they're basically asking like, why is there a discrepancy? Why that we're able to convert 75% of the energy, but the other 25%, but only 25% is used to support metabolism? And the answer to that is that much of the earth is covered by water, and only very little of the earth's space is actually land. And of that land, only 11% are suitable for agriculture. And because of this is why like the amount of biomass produced decreases by a lot. This is one of the factors. There are also other factors like variations in weather, what part of the year you are in, whether it's drought, whether there's a lot of floods. So there's a bunch of other variables, but one of the main one is that a lot of land isn't able to grow agriculture, or isn't able to be used for agriculture, and the fact that we have limited amount of land to start off with. And then for 4, we're going to figure out how much energy in kilocalories per year it would take to support Earth's current human population. And we're assuming that everyone weighs 75 kilograms and require 2,000 kilograms per day. So how we would do the math is it would be 2,000 kcal per day per human. And then we need to multiply that by 365 because that's how many days are in a year. And once we do that, we get 7.3 times 10 to the 5. kcal per year per human. And then what we would need to do is multiply by the human population. So we would multiply that by 6 times 10 to the 9 humans on Earth. And that gives us the answer to the question, which is the kilocalorie consumed per year by the human population, which comes out to be 4.4 times 10 to the 10 to the 15 kcal per year consumed by humans. And then for the next part, it's asking us to estimate the energy contained in 170 billion tons of organic material. And they're asking us to compare the amount required to support the current human population. So similarly to the question that we did before, we would take the 4.4 times 10 to the 15 and multiply by the value we got in question 3b, because that's where we did the 700 billion tons and we converted that. So we already have the numbers from above. We would just need to do 4.4 times 10 to the 15 divided by 6.6 times 10 to the 17. And that should give us 6. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to be able to write. Yeah, that would give us 6.8 times 10 to the negative 1. And a way to interpret that number is that 68% of the total biomass would be consumed by humans. So that's another way to interpret that result. Then C is asking, is it reasonable to assume all the primary productivity on Earth is available to support humans? If not, what else needs to be considered? Does anyone have any idea? Do you guys think it's reasonable to assume that? So the plant biomass on Earth ultimately supports and like nourishes all animals, fungi, and many prokaryotes too. So it's not just humans. So if all humans alive today were consuming 2,000 kilocalories per year, only 32% of the biomass would be available for the other organisms. So So it is reasonable that they are able to support all humans, but other things we would need to consider would be the other animals that would need those resources, such as like other animals, fungi, and a lot of prokaryotes. I see a comment which says, I do not think it is reasonable because there are a large number of species and not just us. Yes, that is a great answer. So with just humans, yeah, we're like all the biomass would be able to sustain us, but the reality is there's a large number of species and we're just not the only one. Okay, so for question 5 through 7, we are going to go through statements and either pick A or B. And A is going to be likely to be true, and B means it's not likely to be true. So it says that 2 species of hawks are found at various times of the year in the United States. Species A eats mice and squirrel, both of which eat seeds, and species B eats snake, which feed on mice and squirrel. Given what you know about trophic structure, if other characteristics of 2 hawks species are similar, which of the following are likely true? So the first question is, for a given feeding area, the number of species B that could be supported is likely to be smaller than the number of species of A that could be supported. So do you guys think this is likely to be true or not likely to be true. So I'm seeing likely to be true for question 5. I would say this is B. It's not likely to be true just because it's saying that the number of species B that could be supported is likely to be smaller than of species A that could be supported. And it's because since species B is primarily feeding on primary consumer, they will have an average of actually actually I think this is likely be true. I'm sorry. Yeah, the chats are right. No, I think you had it correctly because species A is eating squirrels, whereas species B is eating snakes. And snakes are secondary consumers, whereas the mice are primary consumers. So whatever's eating the primary consumer will have on average a tenfold greater food base available than species A will, which feed on snakes. So here, primary consumers will have, or let's rewrite this. So species feeding on will have on average a tenfold greater food base available. Yeah, I don't know why, but in the key I had it like separately. So for 6, it's saying reduction in the available primary productivity in the feeding area would tend to have lesser effect on species A than B. So this one is asking whether primary producers would have a lesser effect on species A than B, and this one would be not likely to be true because species A is the one that eats primary consumers. So if they're lower, then primary productivity would also go down by a lot. Whereas for the snake, it's eating secondary consumers. So I'm gonna be not likely to be true. All right, so the next question is saying if the seeds consumed by the mice and the squirrels in this feeding area were contaminated with heavy metals, you would expect to find much lower concentration of heavy metals in species A than in species B. So, what do you guys think about this? So, for this question, you can think about it in kind of an accumulation type of way. So species A would need to eat about like 10 grams of mice and squirrel for every gram of like hawk mass added, and species B would have to eat 10 grams of snake that already ate 100 grams of mice and squirrel, because the snakes are going to eat the squirrel and the mice. So what the species B is going to eat is going to have a higher accumulation of this toxicity. So the higher up you're on the food chain, the more likely you are to eat an organism that has more accumulated um, heavy metals or other sort of bad contamination. Seeing comments, yeah, the 10% rule, it just adds up more. And then see another comment that says because B is eating them and getting it from them. Wait, so B is eating them and getting it from them. It's not likely true. So the reason that it is likely true is how I like to imagine it is think of like a really small fish and that eats like a poisonous food, something in the ocean that's poisonous. So the small fish eats that. And then a bigger fish isn't going to eat one fish. It's more likely going to eat like 100 of those fish, right? So that's why like the higher predator you are, the more likely you are to accumulate it because you consume a lot more animals which have already ingested the contaminants. Yeah, I see a comment that says the 10% has to do with nutrients and not bioaccumulation. Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. So 10% of the nutrients go up each level, but the amount of bioaccumulation is magnified a lot because you're consuming more. All right, and then we're on to question A, right? Or question 8 right now. So in addition to an energy source, primary producers require adequate mineral nutrient nutrients. You have been monitoring the net productivity of a grassland area for several years. Over the years, its NPP increased initially, then leveled off. And you suspect that availability of nutrient is the limiting productivity. So now we're going to do a hypothetical experimental design to determine whether nutrient is limiting NPP or not. So there's a lot of ways to do this. One proposal is to test whether the particular nutrient is limiting NPP. We can subdivide areas into a smaller plot. And you might notice this with a lot of like ecology studies is instead of like it's almost impossible in certain studies to measure everything or all of the biomes in the world. So usually you pick an area and then you subdivide it into smaller plots. So we're going to do that here. And some plots can be treated by adding nutrients and others can be left untreated. So that allows us to see, okay, so this plot has the nutrient, that plot doesn't have the nutrient. And then we can see whether NPP is limited in one of them, and if it is, then we'll know whether it's the missing nutrient that's causing this or not. So given our design, what results would you expect if only one of the nutrient you test is limiting? So that is question B, and for that, we would test each of the plots for a single nutrient, and we would expect to see an increase in growth only on the plot supplemented with the limiting nutrient. So say on like plot B, we see that there is a limited NPP, then we would try adding that limited nutrient. And then if it increases, then we know, okay, that was the missing nutrient that was causing the leveling off. And for some more complicated results, when there is more than one nutrients that are limiting, we would have to test each plot for single nutrients. And if we don't see any difference in growth when we add that one nutrient back, then we can assume that there are other nutrients also missing or playing a role in this experiment. And what do you guys think could be other factors for nutrient limitation that might cause NPP to level off? Other than like the nutrients available in the soil, what other factors do you think can affect plant productivity, net productivity? Yeah, so what other factors other than nutrient limitation might cause NPP to level off? Yeah, competitions is one of the answers because you can think about it as like density per unit area. And if there's not enough nutrients available, um, that could result to, yes, reduction of sunlight is also a good answer. There's also water availability, physical or chemical conditions. There's also like whether a symbiotic relationship is there or not. Yeah, all great answers. Thank you. All right, any questions so far? Sorry, I haven't been able to write. My iPad's acting weird. All right, let's move on to the next part. Let me read this part out loud. Making decisions to preserve communities requires an understanding and integration of many factors. Assume you work for the US government and you manage a large national forest. You are told that to maintain the economy in that area, the government has agreed to allow foresters remove 500,000 acres of trees from a 1 million-acre parcel. The parcel is almost square. You have asked your staff to do an analysis of two possible methods for implementing the plan. Proposal 1. Split the 1 million acres in half and allow the foresters to harvest the trees on one of the halves. Proposal 2 is divide the 1 million-acre tracts into 50 parcels and allow the foresters to harvest half of the plants in each parcel. So basically the question is, if you need to remove that amount of tree, are you just going to split it in half and take it all, or are you going to make smaller squares and take half from each of that square? So now we're going to list some ecological advantages and disadvantages to each of the proposals. So for proposal 1, one of the advantages is fewer roads would be needed because we're just splitting it up in half and taking it all. So that could be one advantage. There would also be less edge habitat relative to interior habitat, so we wouldn't have a lot of those. And if we do that, it might favor um, more species that are on the interior because we're leaving like the middle part of it alone. So those are some advantages for proposal 1. And some disadvantages could be that regeneration of trees might be slower because the seed sources are very distant, and more soil nutrient would be lost from the land because you've just taken like almost like half of that tree. And we would also have complete losses of some communities, and that could result in like animals or plant communities to be distributed heterogeneously. We could even lose like a whole species, like if a certain animal only lives on like that half, and if we completely remove that, then we might lose that whole population of animals. Now let's look at proposal two. One of the advantages could be like all cut areas would be closer to seed source. So even if you remove half in like one part of it, the other part is still there. So compared to the proposal one, it's closer to seed source. So regeneration is possible, more likely, and faster. And the advantages is also less soil nutrients would be lost, and less animal species might potentially be safe and not disturbed as much because some of their habitat could still remain. But some of the disadvantages for that is there could be more roads and therefore more edge habitats and more disturbance just to get to those specific spots to remove the plants, the trees. And the result may also be invasion of more exotic species, and also replanting would be more diffuse and less efficient if we do multiple plots and took half of it from that. So I'm going to skip the question two because it's a math question, and since I'm not able to write, I don't think it would be very helpful for that. But if you guys feel otherwise, please let me know. All right, so for part B, it's saying species B is small, rodent-like herbivore that exists in small numbers in the forest. Its preferred food and habitat are found along the edges of the forest and are composed primarily of herbivores, non-woody annual plants that produce tender roots in the spring and plentiful seeds later in the year. So for this type of species, proposal 2 would produce more edge habitat than proposal 1, and if the success of the species is directly related to the amount of edge habitat, because they're telling us they live in edge habitats. So proposal 2 would be more successful for species B because it would disturb less edge habitat. And then for question C, it's saying species C is a predatory bird that feeds on small rodent and occasionally on snakes and other reptiles. It can range over large distances looking for food. It nests in hollows that form naturally in particular species of trees. These hollows are not found in trees less than 20 years of age, but are common in trees 40 years or older. So we're assuming that 40-year-old trees are going to be randomly distributed throughout the forest, right? Like they're not just going to be on one place. There's going to be old trees throughout the forest. And it's both um, proposals are going to eliminate half of the trees. So both proposals would reduce the availability of nesting site for this species by in half, whether it's in the edge or not in the edge. It tells us the species can fly over a long period of time. So it's not going to matter where those habitats are. It's just the fact that its nesting locations would reduce in half no matter where or what proposal we go through. So for C, it's not going to matter what proposal we choose. Either one we choose, the species is going to have half of its habitat left. All right, and then this question says, conservation biologists have debated extensively which is better, many small reserves or few large ones. So we have a couple of questions following that. The first one is, what factors should be considered in making judgment about the size and location of reserves. So what do you guys think scientists should consider before making a judgment about the size and location of reserves? So one of the main ones I would consider is what kind of species we're dealing with and which one will be better for those species, because we can't universally say, oh, like a small one is the best or a large one is the best. It's going to have to depend on the animal, like whether the animal requires like a very specific type of environment or it needs more open areas or more edge habitats. So it would have to be dependent on the animal to make a size about or make a decision about the size and the location of the reserves. Um, Comment says I would argue to preserve the species with the largest positive influence on the ecosystem. Yeah, that is a great answer too. Like when we have multiple different species we're dealing with and need to compromise on one or the other, I think it definitely makes sense to preserve the ones that have a large good influence on the ecosystem rather than other ones. That's also why a lot of times scientists are really interested in keystone species because we really need to protect those to maintain an ecosystem. Yeah, great answer there. So the second part, so we just kind of talked about it right now, but it says some ecologists argue that we should be concerned about preserving the largest number of species. Others argue that we should be more concerned about saving those species judged to be unusual importance. Develop an argument to support one of these viewpoints. So we just talked about the viewpoint for preserving the one with the most influence. And there's multiple answers to that. Like some might argue it's best to save the largest number of species. Um, and some might argue that maybe it's more important to save the more exotic plants. But I'm leaning more towards preserving the ones that have the largest impact on our ecosystem. But yeah, there's no right answer to that question there. And same with question 4, based on our answers to 1 through 3, which of the proposal for removing 500,000 acres from the national forest would you recommend? So do you, like, based on the questions we've been going through, would you guys recommend proposal 1 or proposal 2? So proposal 1 was the one where you just draw a line in the middle and remove half the plants, and proposal 2 was the one where you would remove plants from a specific section. I have a comment that says I would do 2. Yeah, I think I would also do 2, mostly because with 1, there's a lot of risk of losing an entire population of species if we just remove a huge chunk. Whereas with the option 2, there's less chance of that happening and there's more chance of seed dispersal and revitalizing that ecosystem, whereas 1 has more risks. But again, there's no right answer for this question as long as you have your advantages and your disadvantages and you're leaning one way, that would be okay for this question. All right, that was our last question for today, and I'm really sorry again for the tech difficulties and I wasn't able to write. Um, and thank you for participating through the chat and asking questions. All right, I will put the extra credit form in the chat. Oh, thank you. You guys are so sweet. All right, make sure to fill that out to get extra credit. And if you have any questions about your other sessions or anything else regarding this, please feel free to email me. Yeah, so there will be one for next week, but it won't be on a specific topic. It'll be more of a study session slash Q&A. So please come with tons of questions and we'll talk through it. And that will be the last one for the year. So if you still need a session for extra credit, make sure to come to that as well. Yeah, thank you. You have a great day as well. All right, I hope everyone got to the form. I'm going to stop the live stream. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.